Okay, so as I promised, I will make a quick Wolfdale binning video right now. So recently I got 7 new Wolfdale chips, 3 different model numbers. So I got one E8600 chip, then I got 3 E8500 CPUs and 3 E8400 CPUs. They are all technically exactly the same CPU with just different max multipliers. So they have identical performance as long as clock speeds are the same. So I just want to see how they look like on ambient. The batch numbers on them are really interesting, so that's why I wanted to take them, and the deal was good, like 30 euros for all of the 7 CPUs. And just interested to see what they could do on just water cooling before any possible LN2 tests. I already have pretty much all of the top scores with the E8400 CPU, apart from the ones that need P45 platform, so CPUs I validation and SuperPi 1AM. But I'm not really that much interested in those, because I don't really like P45 platform at all, because it's just so slow. The performance with P35 and P45 chipsets is just so horrible compared to X38 and X48. So it's not that big thing for me. So I already got pretty much the top scores with the E8400. E8500 I have none. E8600 I still have the top score in Wprime 32, which was made at 6.7 GHz, which is really nice result. So I already know like what I should be aiming for if I try any of these CPUs on ambient. Although good ambient overclocking doesn't guarantee anything when it comes to like LN2. On LN2 it's so much about cold scaling, what is the max temperature you can run the CPU at, and so on. So the SF3D CPU that also did 6.7 Wprime 32 did 4.5 SuperPi 32M with 1.31 volts. So that's actually not that good like result in the end, but it scales just so well on on LN2 with temperatures, and it can run very cold temperatures overall. My other CPU is better on ambient. It can do 4.5 SuperPi 32M with like 1.26 or 1.27 volts. So it's definitely better, and it can also do like 5 GHz and above for SuperPi 32M Pifast on water. And it's very good on LN2 as well, like 6.65 Pifast and so on. And so let's just see, do any of these CPUs do at least the same level as the SF3D CPU, so 1.31 or less for 4.5 SuperPi 32M. Booting these CPUs is very hard, so it's very likely that you can't boot the desired frequency, but you can still run 32M at that frequency. So it's better to just boot in at a lower frequency and then just overclock it to the desired frequency in OS when testing for the lowest possible voltage. So the platform is pretty much the same as always. So Rampage Extreme, the good one, you can see my signature right over there. 2 sticks of Super Talent DDR3 memory. 2000 Cas 7 is the stock configuration, but doesn't really matter for this because I will just run the sticks at auto to minimize any possible error in my testing, so that if anything crashes, it will be the CPU. Custom water cooling loop on the CPU, Superflower 2000 watt power supply, and the modification you see on the board is the PLL modification to run PLL voltage of lower than the stock 1.5 volts. But for this testing doesn't really matter. The PLL voltage will be somewhat like a bit under 1.5 volts. Doesn't really matter. It doesn't have any impact on water or air overclocking. So without further ado, let's get started. Okay, so this is the first thing you see when you turn on the system. So we can enter the BIOS by pressing F1 on our keyboard. This is always the issue, that it doesn't really save correct date and time when we clear CMOS and everything. So there's maybe something bad with the battery of the motherboard, but doesn't really matter. It doesn't impact the performance and the overall use of the system. So when I test any of these CPUs, it's best to just leave the memory at auto, so we can be sure that the memory is not the thing that starts to crash. So let's do one test boot, check that everything is alright in the OS, and then we can try. So let's disable all of these. We don't need audio or LAN in the OS, and when we look at hardware monitor, we can see the temperature is only 21.5 degrees on the CPU, and voltage PLL is 1.4, as I stated. Doesn't really matter for this, but this vCore value is not correct. It will be a bit higher for the correct speed. On Rampage Extreme, when you do CMOS clear and initial post with any CPU, at least with any Wolfdale, the stock vCore will be 1.065. So let's go to the OS and see what it will look like. Okay, so the operating system is now set up, so we can start testing the CPU. So it's quite simple when testing these Wolfdale CPUs on water. I would just leave the memory on auto, as I already said, and these CPU models are technically the same CPU in the end. It's just the same CPU model with different max multiplier. So E8400, E8600, even 8700, they all have identical performance when the clock frequencies are the same. The only difference is just the max multiplier, so therefore E8600 and E8700 can reach higher clock speeds than, for example, E8400, especially on X48. That is more FSP limited compared to P45, for example. So we can start by selecting AI overclock tuner to manual, and 500 on the front side bus with 9 multiplier, so that will result in 4.5 CPU, 4.5 gigahertz on the CPU. We don't really have to touch these settings here in the CPU configuration. I always leave the FSP strap to Northbridge at auto. It usually sets it to best value by itself. Stock PCI Express, memory on auto, as I said, so that we can be sure that if anything crashes, it will be the CPU and not the memory. EPU 2 phase control to full phase. CPU voltage 1.35 with load line calibration enabled. Now CPU PLL voltage. As I'm setting it manually on the motherboard with my modification, I will leave it at auto. But if you are using the board, just like you should, so no modifications whatsoever, just type in the lowest value you can set here, so 1.5 volts. 1.5 is the minimum, as you can see on the top right corner of the screen. So 1.51 is the min and 3 volts is the max. FSP termination 1.4, and Northbridge maybe 1.5, doesn't really matter, and 1.7 on the DRAM. I set these to near stock values myself usually, and disable the spread spectrums. So let's see if we can boot 4.5 with 1.35 volts. Temperature should be good. So yeah. Let's double check, and let's F10 and so save and exit. And as always, it matters so much which motherboard model you are using. So Rampage Extreme is a lot better performing motherboard compared to all other 775 motherboards there is, pretty much. So the vCore requirements per given clock are obviously different depending on which motherboard you are running. So for example, this Rampage Extreme can run CPUs a lot higher compared to the Workstation Evolution board that I have been using for like pre-testing and so on. So the vehicle requirements for different clock speeds is lower on the Rampage Extreme compared to that workstation Evolution motherboard. So 4.5, 1.35 booted fine. The VID is reading wrong, but doesn't really matter. So memory is just auto. Rampage Extreme BIOS is 1301. So Pifast is harder to pass on these CPUs compared to Wprime, and 32M is pretty much the hardest thing to pass. But we can do like quick Pifast run just out of interest and see it's already unstable. So we could actually try quick Wprime. Temperatures should be good, so if we see, if we look at core temp, just 40 degrees. I think this should pass, but yes, Pifast is harder to pass on these CPUs compared to, yes, did pass, but Pifast did not. Pifast crashed immediately, so it's quite funny. Let's try SuperPi, just out of interest, quickly. So let's try 1M, and even look, even 1M is harder. It would be very, very stupid if 32M passed, but Pifast and 1M did not. But yes, so yeah, so this is not stable, so we can already determine very, very quickly that this CPU is not good. It should not do worse than the SF3D CPU, so it should do 4.5, 32M, Pifast, etc. with 1.3 volts or less. So 1.35 is relatively high. So this is not very, very good, if you ask me. So now we can move on to the second CPU. So it's very easy to bin these, but this is just my personal way of doing it. You could use something modern like Cinebench or Lynx. Lynx was very popular back then in 775 days in like 2008 and 2009. But SuperPi 32M works perfectly well for my use because these are the tests I will be running anyways in the end. So now we can turn off the system and swap the CPU. So in order to read the VID value correctly on Rampage Extreme, you actually have to do one save and exit and reboot in order to read the VID. So when you do the initial CMOS clear and power on, it will just go into some like safe mode, so it will always be 1.065 with any Wolfdale CPU. But now I did one save and exit, and when we go to voltage, it's reading 1.33 volts for the CPU speed at 3.3 gigahertz. So it's quite high, if you ask me. But let's see how it does. So this is the second E8600 that I got. I got this in a separate pack. Not among those 7 chips which I already mentioned. This is another one I got individually. So seems to boot fine. Okay, so it did boot fine. Temperature should be good. A bit warmer than the previous one, so 31 at idle. But of course that's probably not even accurate. So let's try Wprime just for temperature wise. I'm just out of interest because it was 41 before. We don't have to let it pass if it seems to be stable. So yeah, it seems to pass. Not even 40 degrees. So let's try Pifast. It's not even stable. So it's even worse than the... Yeah, it's worse than the previous one, so bad luck for me. Okay, so now when moving on to the E8500 chips, on brief testing with the Workstation Evolution, one of these CPUs seemed very bad. It was 2010 batch, so it's not that big of a surprise. And two of these seemed somewhat okay, but let's test them now. So 4.5, 1.35 volts, so identical profile as with the E8600s. We can just check temperatures once again, but this doesn't really matter. The temperature reading it doesn't always even work with these CPUs. For example, the Core 1 isn't working at all, like clearly. Same temperature, idle and load. It's not really, it can't be correct. So that's why I don't really trust these too much, these values I mean. So it passed 4.5. Let's try Pifast, which failed with both of the E8600s. And seems to run. So it's funny, if you think about it, back then this model was cheaper than the E8600, and this far it's doing better than the more this cheaper model is doing better than the more expensive E8600. So quite funny. Yeah. So sadly we cannot move the VCore down in OS because there's no software. We can only increase the clock speed. So if we want to test the lowest voltage for 4.5, we have to reboot and just set lower value. I mean set lower voltage in the BIOS. So let's do that now. Okay, so now I booted 4.5 with only 1.3 volts. Again, not reading correctly because of the CPU Z bug. So it's 1.3 volts, spot on. Memory, auto, Rampage Extreme 1301. And let's try Pifast once again. So if this passes, it's already so much better than the E8600s. And boom, we are finally having instability. So the voltage requirement is somewhere between 1.3 and 1.35. This is week 51 batch of 2008. Somewhat okay, I think, but not very golden. So let's set 1.32 or 1.33, and I think that will be the lowest for this chip. Okay, so it passed with 1.33 volts. So this is the lowest VCore for 4.5 for this chip. So now we can test the other two. I will go through them. I will mark which is the best one. Then I will test the E8400s, and then we can wrap up. So you don't have to watch me doing every step with each CPU. So I'm sure you get the idea by now. So the quality difference between individual CPU is quite high. You can find a CPU that will need 1.4 volts for 4.5 Pifast, SuperPi, etc. And you might find a CPU that only needs like a bit over 1.2. So just saying, we need to find a chip that does this speed with very low voltage, but even then it's not a guarantee for good performance on LN2. I have to agree that this is not the fastest CPU model to bin, because we are binning the actual core, not the FSP. Usually with Wolfdale CPUs you don't have to bin the FSP, or well, at least I haven't binned it myself, at least when it comes to the E8600 model. Pretty much E8600 it's never FSP limited. It's pretty much limited by the actual core. So for example, when comparing to E6600, that one is pretty much just FSP limited. So we only bin FSP. If it's good enough to our liking, then we can actually test the core as well. But when it comes to Wolfdale, I just test the actual core pretty much. Okay, so overall, for my standards, the CPUs are quite bad, to be honest. So the E8600s, both like around 1.35, 1.36 for Pifast, etc. Well, neither could pass at 1.35, so the voltage requirement is probably at like 1.36, 1.37, 1.38, something like this. When it comes to E8500, they were pretty much very close to each other in the end. And I really thought during my pre-testing with the Workstation Evolution that the 2010 batch was that bad, but all the three CPUs could do Pifast lower than 1.35. Best one was 1.32, worst one was the 2010, like 1.34. But they were very, very close to each other. The E8400s were really, really bad. Two of the chips needed 1.4 or even above 1.4 for 4.5 Pifast, and the best one was like 1.35, 1.36, so really, really bad in the end. Considering what I've had already, these aren't that good. I actually got these CPUs based on like batch numbers because I thought that they would be good, but it seems so that the batch number isn't always that kind of important with these CPUs. You can find really, really good CPUs among very random 2009 or maybe even 2010 batch CPUs. Not that likely with 2010 batch CPUs, but some 2009 CPUs are really, really awesome. My best E8400, which I used for the top scores, was 2009 batch CPU, and I saw one 6.7 Pifast CPU recently, and it was 2009 batch as well. So batch is never a guarantee, but it might improve the chances to find a good CPU. So yeah, so that's pretty much the end. I'm pretty sure that none of these CPUs are good. I might try the best E8500 briefly later on LN2, but that's pretty much it. I'm pretty sure that the E8600s aren't better than my current ones, and let alone the E8400 chips that I now tested. So I will definitely not try the E8400s on LN2. But that's pretty much the end. I'm sure you got the idea how to bin these Wolfdale CPUs. It's very, very easy, but it's still slower compared to like E6600 bidding, but still relatively fast in the end. So if you like to see this video about very old hardware and how to bin and select good CPUs, I mean how to search for good CPUs and how to speed bin them, then give a thumbs up. And thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. And if you have any interest like how low voltage a good CPU can run, here's a past Pifast run at 4.5 GHz with only a 1.23 set vCore. So the measured value is like 1.225 to 1.23. So it's significantly better than the chips I tested today, like 0.1 volts better. So the quality difference between chips is just huge. So very, very bad CPUs that I tested today.